Plants vs. Zombies achieved one of the biggest downfalls in the history of video games. At the very beginning, the franchise enjoyed great popularity as the first game in this series became a phenomenon after just a few days from its release. Moreover, their popularity was constantly growing thanks to frequent updates and a loyal fan base. This contributed to making the decision of a lifetime when the creator of Plants vs. Zombies sold the game to EA for $750 million. During this time, the game's popularity was growing as always, but 2 years later, everything changed. The popularity unexpectedly began to decline despite the fact that EA was regularly publishing new games. It didn't help with stopping the downfall. Today, Plants vs. Zombies has lost almost 96% of players overall, and this year, the third version of the saga was released, although I feel like nobody even noticed. So what caused this decline in popularity? At first glance, it looks like EA has killed this series, but there's something more, something that lies deeper. And today, I will show you the history of Plants vs. Zombies and explain how the hell this series got killed despite being one of the best performing games on the internet. But to better understand that, we need to get back to 2006. The idea for the game was inspired by a fish simulator game in San Aquarium and developed into a tower defense game featuring plants fighting against zombies. Totally, it took 3.5 years to make Plants vs. Zombies, and it was officially released on May 5th, 2009. The game was available for literally all platforms, even for the phones with a keyboard your dad used to use. A mobile phone was by far the most popular platform to play the game on because on other platforms the game was paid, and for the phones it was free. Thanks to that, it attracted a lot of younger players who didn't have money to buy games. Plants vs. Zombies features a friendly, bright appearance, humor in the notes left by zombies, or the tombstones that instead of saying RIP says expired. There was also Crazy Dave, who adds extra humor and charm to the game and is kidnapped at the end of the game. These elements contributed to the wave of young players who created the snowball of popularity. The success of a game of this magnitude brings with it two things: money and buyers. Not only buyers of the game, but also buyers of the developer. That's when EA bought PopCap. But let's keep in mind one important detail. PopCap still maintains the role of the developer, while EA is responsible for publishing the games. We all know what usually happens when EA acquires a studio with a very famous game. Fuck everything and print the most amount of money possible. Obviously, EA's purchase of PopCap was no small thing because from the moment EA bought this company, they released more than 8 installments in less than 9 years. That's not trying to milk a franchise? I don't know what is. And what happens when a company does this? Besides being a great cash grab, something is added that is the worst thing that can happen to a franchise: fatigue. Let's start with Plants vs. Zombies Adventures. It's a typical Facebook game that combines tower defense with city building, like in Clash of Clans. It was the first and last game in the series made specifically for a social media platform. This allowed for social interactions between players, such as sending zombies to invade friends' towns. There was also an energy system to slow down your progress, which is pretty common in Facebook-type games. Of course, you could buy more energy for real money, or just complete the entire game without an effort using your mom's credit card. The game was deleted 1 year later because it was not profitable. A few months after the release of its predecessor, Plants vs. Zombies 2 was published, and it was not a bad game. Maybe it wasn't as good as Plants vs. Zombies 1, but it was pretty decent. It seemed that after the failure that was the Facebook game, this one could return to being what it was. The story of Plants vs. Zombies 2 was basically that Crazy Dave lost a taco in a time vortex and traveled through time to defend different historical ages from zombie hordes with plants that shoot projectiles. The game was about time traveling, going through different stages, and had new mechanics that helped in the game, such as plant food that awakened a special power in each plant. This mechanic was later used to add millions of microtransactions, but anyway, when it comes to EA's microtransactions, they can be taken for granted in all other games that will be released in the series. Plants vs. Zombies 2 was developed as a mobile game, not naturally oriented to PC like the first one was, and I think it was a terrible decision. Plants vs. Zombies 1 was available on all platforms, and each of them had something unique. For example, consoles had a 1v1 mode, and for Nintendo, you had a mini-game where you had to beat a giant zombie. The game does not have high hardware requirements, so it's not a problem to make it on different platforms, but when you make a mobile phone the only platform you can play the game on, all of the loyal fans will try it anyway, even if they are not playing games on the phone. Now, being for mobile means you'll see all sorts of paid modifiers to boost your progress, or whatever that can be sold to make your game easier. I'm not against this type of monetization, but it would be better if the game was available on all platforms, and on the phones it was more extended with the things that can be bought for money. After Plants vs. Zombies 2, they released their first game completely different from tower defense, Plants vs. Zombies Garden Warfare. It's mostly aimed at an audience that has never been its main strength and can only be played on a console or PC. Namely, it was a shooter game. EA wanted to introduce something new to the franchise, and it wasn't a bad game. It's a funny shooter that you don't have to take seriously at all. You choose to fight as plants or zombies, each with unique abilities, with a goal to conquer or defend gardens on battlefields. This game is an exception when it comes to microtransactions. All in-game items can be earned through gameplay, and microtransactions were largely cosmetic, like in other shooting games. From early 2014 to early 2016, there were no new games, and then Garden Warfare 2 arrived, which was the same as Part 1. Literally, there's not much to say here. The only thing that changed was different maps, a few more zombies, a few more plants, and that's it. 1 month later, they released another game, Plants vs. Zombies Heroes, which is a mobile card game. Remember 2016 when mobile games of this style were sweeping everywhere and the biggest hit was Clash Royale, right? And with this, I'm not saying they are copies by any means, but they took some elements from this game for sure. Plants vs. Zombies Heroes was not a game where EA's influence was much noticed, and it functioned as a transition between Plants vs. Zombies 2 and Plants vs. Zombies 3 in the future. Today, the game is totally forgotten by both EA and PopCap. It was a game made literally to make money. 2016 ended with 3 games in 3 months. Bit better than 2013, but by this point, the franchise fatigue was more than noticeable. New plants, new zombies, but nothing more than that. From this year on, the Plants vs. Zombies releases were reduced a bit, but with the arrival of 2020 came what was one of the worst games of the entire franchise. Plants vs. Zombies Battle for Neighborville. It's also a third-person shooter like Garden Warfare 1 and 2, but it's not a continuation of the series. The difference between those games is small. It has some new maps and modes, but it's nothing remarkable. However, Battle for Neighborville ended content support very early, which disappointed some players who expected longer-term updates. While some people liked this game for its new content and ideas, some fans felt it lacked the same charm as Garden Warfare 1 and 2. The final point came with Plants vs. Zombies 3, a game that was clearly developed to generate more revenue. The game features 3D cartoon-style graphics and is clearly designed for mobile devices, showing influences from Clash Royale and Plants vs. Zombies Heroes. You got some new characters and bosses, but let's be honest, it's not even close to being as great as the first original Plants vs. Zombies. The game introduced a new tower upgrade system that allowed players to level up their plants, making them stronger and more effective as they progressed through the game. This RPG-like progression system was changed from the traditional static plant mechanics. Additionally, it is filled with microtransactions, and the large number of paid elements makes it unobtainable for casual players. Essentially, you had to pay to enjoy the game. In conclusion, the decline of popularity of Plants vs. Zombies was caused by changing the priorities from making enjoyable games with passion to farming the most amount of money possible. Both PopCap and EA contributed to the downfall of this series. If I had to sum it up in one word, it would be greed. Even though the golden years of the series have passed, Plants vs. Zombies will always be one of the best series of games in history. If you enjoyed this documentary, check out another one with Unturned.